Nothing gets conversation going like a good storm story. So my understanding is that Lisa Burke is always looking for help in the nursery. I think we're always open for new volunteers, right? And this might be a good day to give the announcement for volunteers because the nursery is nicely air conditioned in there. What a treat it is to be together, even though it's warm. We had a bunch of men looking for these communion cup holder things, and that didn't go well. We couldn't find them. I'm not sure who ultimately located them. But I was going to guess it might be a woman who found them. So we'll share communion together next week. Before our sermon, just want to welcome back some really, really special people. I think I saw Mason earlier. I don't see him there he is. Mason and Madeline and Tad and Colin. And I know I saw Becky at some point. And then the Maimones are away on vacation. But those 7 young adults just spent, I think, 9 days learning about sharing the gospel with kids. And we are so excited to see what's going to happen in our state through you. We're proud of you in the Lord. We love you, and we really missed you last Sunday. So welcome back. Make sure you have a dialogue with each of them. And in particular, if you can seek out Becky. Becky shared one of the 2 testimonies during the program, and just some deep things that God was doing in her heart. Make sure you probe it and ask it and see if she'll share her story with you. All right, do we have our projection here? We are winding our way through a series about struggles in life. And we've kind of collected some of our struggles together under some buckets. We have the bucket of anger, and so much of our lives seem like a battle on things I want to get angry about and how do I deal with it. Guilt and regret is a massive place that many of us go to, as is shame, wanting to hide from others and cover up. Last week we looked at suffering. How do we please the Lord in the midst of suffering? Because God speaks about that a lot. This week is fear. Fear is a big deal for many of us, and it looks different. We experience it different week after week, and the next week is yesing, which just a quick little story on saying yes when we should be saying no. I made up this word yesing, and I was just kind of prepping for this week, and I was like, I wonder if that's even a word. 900,000 Google results from the word yesing. So just when you think something is new, you realize there's nothing new under the sun. In each one of these, we put out the premise. As we follow Jesus, we have this amazing opportunity to please God in every circumstance. And so 2 Corinthians tells us, so we make it our goal to please Him. Not to earn favor, but because God is so good and He's such a good Father and He loves you. And because He's so generous and He's so worth it, in each circumstance in our lives, we have an opportunity to please Him, to respond in a way that He would like His children to respond. We had an awesome wedding Sunday night. Jake and Morgan Clark got married. That was a fun celebration together. Perhaps just as fun, I got to spend the night with Sean and Donna just kind of hanging out, and that was a delight of my heart. We have several more weddings. Olivia's the next one up, Olivia and Peter. In a couple weeks, we get to go to Pat's Peak, followed by Rachel and Brent and Margaret and Greg, kind of wind up the summer. So a lot of honeymoons going on. And so I'm always intrigued, like, all right, what are your plans for the honeymoon? And some of them are staying local, some are going quite a distance, but it brings to mind our honeymoon. We kind of wanted to do both. We wanted to, kind of had to stay local for different reasons, but also wanted to get away, and so we decided Nova Scotia is kind of far, but it's still kind of close, and we had a great couple of days traveling up the coast of Maine. This is 19 years ago. Traveled up the coast of Maine, stopped, went to Bar Harbor, and it's our last stop before catching the boat ride to Nova Scotia. And so we were just really excited, newly married. I thought Esther was awesome. I still think she's awesome. And we drive our truck onto the Cat. Any of you ever ride the Cat? Okay. We drive our truck on the Cat. I think it was the first year the Cat was running. So they're still working out some of the logistics on it. We drive on, we go up top, nice boat. It's a hydro something or other. And then it launches. And, I don't know, probably an hour into this thing, a couple hours in, we couldn't believe it. Old ladies were flying across the ship because it's tilted at such an angle. And then it's rolling back, and you look out the other window as we were gripping onto poles, and women were crying, literally. We look out the window, and there's the ocean. You're staring at it. And we finally got to Nova Scotia, and all these years, I just saw the Cat is back up. I think this year it's starting up again. And guess what? We will never do. You could give me a free ride on that thing. I'm not going. You could promise me that all the kinks, all the speed, everything has been worked out. New technology is in. It's taken 1,000 really decent, pleasant trips to Nova Scotia, and I will not get on that thing for one reason. I was scared to death. I was so afraid that this new marriage, this new creation God had put together with Esther and I was going to last 3 days, and that was it. I thought we were done. It's one of the most frightened moments that I've ever had. But it's kind of followed. I'm going to get a little personal. It's July 4th weekend, so we're kind of intimate here. It's followed closely by something that's actually deeper. The most scared I've ever been. I had no reason to be scared. And some of you might be able to relate to this. We went away, you guys, a few years ago anyway, were really generous, and you gave Esther and I a gift, and we went on a cruise. And I think that the very first night, I threw up. And we wrote it off, right? We said, oh, that's motion sickness, you're on a boat. Okay. Maybe a year or two later, Esther and I again are away at David and Norma's 25th renewal, I think it was. They were renewing their vows, did something really special, really well done, and they invited me to come out and kind of perform that. We went out to eat at a local pizza joint before, and they had a sunrise deal on the Kangamangas Highway. And got home, 2 in the morning, I'm throwing up. And wrote it off and said, I must have eaten something bad. Somehow made it, I was ghost white, made it out to that thing and drove home. There's one other episode, and just last year, the elders got together with our wives. Had one of the most amazing nights. That meal was just rich, and it was a blessing. I don't know if it was 2 hours, 3 hours, we just spent together, enjoying friendship and relationship. And Esther and I decided to stay out another hour in Portsmouth, came back to the hotel, and 2 in the morning, guess where I found myself? Over the toilet again. And it was Esther that pointed something out. Scott, this isn't physical. This is panic. It's something about being away from the kids that drives you crazy, and it sparks fear in your heart. And you're just experiencing the physical piece of this. And at first I didn't believe her. And about 2:05 that morning, I believed her. Because there's no reason for this pattern in my life. It wasn't motion sickness. It wasn't food poisoning. It was panic, fear, that gripped my body to the point for no particular reason other than, Scott, you're not with the kids and you're not in control. And that was enough for me. To be gripped by something I felt like I couldn't manage. I don't know if any of you have ever been in that kind of position where fear takes over to the point that it becomes physical and it manifests itself in a very physical way. Because fear, every time in my life, and I've seen it in yours too, fear paralyzes us. Fear will never reside in the heart with joy. You ever see those two hang out? Fear and joy will never share the same location. Happiness, to me, seems like a weak-kneed friend. Happiness is in the heart until fear starts walking up the driveway. And as soon as happiness sees fear coming up, what does happiness do? It's like, packs its bag, it goes out the back door, and I'm out, and I'm leaving the house to fear. Fear paralyzes us, and it sure can't hang out with joy and happiness. I don't know how many times I found 125, but I think there's probably some more, that Jesus offers these words. Do not be afraid. It's packaged differently, it sounds differently at different times, but Jesus says, more often than anything else, don't be afraid. Have courage. Don't worry. Don't be afraid. It comes in command form. But I want to offer this suggestion as we get into the word this morning. This command, do not be afraid, do not fear, has a different tone than some of Jesus' commands. It's got the tone of a compassionate God who throughout all of Scripture is coming towards people who are scared. Think about the stories that we read in the Bible. People hiding, people running, people sheltering, people crying, people worried sick over something. And God, every time, compassionately steps towards these people who are scared, the people who are fearful. And He offers them a reassuring command, not a command to beat them as if, great, I shouldn't be afraid. That's helpful in the moment. I'm here at the toilet throwing up. So I just need to not be afraid. It's more, I think, in this kind of tone. I love you guys. I love you. I am King of the universe. There's nothing. There is no one outside of my grip. There's no one outside of my hand. There's no one outside of my influence. I am the sovereign King of the universe, and I am deeply in love with you. And so there's lots of scary things out there. There's lots of bad things that may happen to you. But you never have to lose hope. You never have to be afraid. Because you can trust in me. I think the compassion of God in that command, do not be afraid, is a better way to hear it rather than the command sometimes we need. It's kind of the slap to get our attention to say, you got to love your enemies. If you're going to look like Jesus, come on, love your enemies. I'll teach you how to do that. This command, though, I think just has that soft touch to it. You don't need to be afraid. Oh, little flock, I'm for you. I'm your good shepherd. Don't be afraid, even though the world is scary out there. You don't need to be afraid. Because God is gentle with those who are afraid. And whatever it is this morning that strikes fear in you, the last time you were afraid, whatever that was, God never discounts it. God never says, don't be afraid because that thing doesn't matter. Don't be afraid because that thing, it's just really insignificant. God never discounts the things that we're afraid of. Rather, He points our eyes to the heavens. You don't need to be afraid, even though Goliath is incredibly scary. You can trust me in this moment. You can trust me. So I wonder, when have you been most afraid? Was it this week, this year? Was it a couple years ago? Do you struggle with fear daily? What's the fertilizer that's growing fear in your heart this morning? And whatever that is, here's, I think, a solid truth for you. Fear comes into our heart and it takes up residence when we lose control. Because I'm not afraid of anything that I have control over, and I don't think you are either. If I can control it, I don't fear it. I just control it. But it's when life and circumstance and people in trouble are outside of my control, outside of my influence, you better believe fear comes knocking on the door. Fear tries to move in. We fear when we lose control, and fear becomes very physical for many of us. All right, I want to invite you to turn to Matthew chapter 8, beginning it in verse 23. You know, I share my story about whatever that was. I don't even want to call it panic, because it doesn't sound manly to call it a panic, right? I share that with you, hopefully maybe to release some of you, to talk about some of your fears, to open up with one another. We have nothing to be ashamed about, but rather in community we have some great hope to attach to, but it happens when we start naming our fears. All right. Matthew chapter 8, beginning in verse 23, is the story that Esther referenced. You can just see it happen quickly. Joy, hope, even faith just pack up. They move out. All the clear thinking leaves. Fear resides. Confidence leaves. Mercy leaves. And you see some people left in a prison with the door slamming. And the question is, if fear locks us in a prison and slams the door, boy, wouldn't it be great to find the way out? Wouldn't it be great to be able to open the door and walk out? Matthew 8, chapter 8, verse 23. What do we know about Matthew? Anyone know what he did for a job before he followed Jesus? All right, so he's like an IRS accountant. We can picture him wearing the white shirt, the dark colored tie, kind of nondescript khakis, nondescript shoes. He's a landlubber guy. I don't think he really went out on boats for adventure, but he's hanging out with some guys that did. So a lot of the disciples, their occupation were fishermen. They were born on the water, born on the ships. They're going out in these waters since they're little guys. It's how they earned a living. They're very comfortable with the ebbs and the flows of the weather. But Matthew's not, as some of the other disciples would not have been. And Matthew's the one that tells us this story. Then he, Jesus, got into the boat and his disciples followed him. I mean, that's a happy scene. And that's us. We get together on a Sunday morning and we follow Jesus. We get in the U-Haul truck and off we go following Jesus. I open my Bible in the morning, I read my verse, and I follow Jesus. This is nice. And for many of us, the second sentence to that, the expectation is, well, if I get my life together and I get in the boat and I follow Jesus, rainbows are coming and joy is coming and peace and prosperity and health and good things are coming when I follow Jesus. And yet Matthew has a different follow-up sentence. Then Jesus got into the boat and his disciples followed him. And without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. Matthew wrote this book in the Greek language. And I just have this vision of Matthew. Because like in English, Greek has synonyms for words. So we could say storm, and Greek would have a word for storm. Or you could say rain cloud, and Greek would have a word for rain cloud. It would have a word for thunderstorm. And I picture Matthew thinking back to this event, flipping through his Greek thesaurus, like, no, it wasn't a thunderstorm. Boom, here's the word that thing was. He uses the word seismos, which we still linger today, right? A seismograph measures the earthquake. A seismologist studies the shaking of the earth. That's the word that Matthew ends up choosing to say, when I think back on that day, that thing was earth-shaking. I've never seen anything like it. It was a seismos, which is only used 2 other times in the New Testament. It's the death of Jesus. There's a seismos around the earth, and the resurrection of Jesus. And so apparently this storm fills in a trilogy of major stories about Jesus and who he is. There's a seismos, a storm that comes suddenly. Any of you grow up in the Midwest? In the Midwest, I've only been out there maybe 3 or 4 times in my life, but every time I've been out there, this amazing thing happens. There's a storm, and because I'm from the Northeast, I think, oh no, a storm is coming, because I see it. The Midwesterners are like, what are you talking about? That thing's like 25 miles away. It's not coming, and even if it is, we still have like an hour before it ever gets here. In the Midwest, you see storms coming. This storm, there's no indicator. Matthew says, it just came. It was sudden. I'm in the boat. I'm reading a book. I'm playing some Uno. We're playing hearts. Jesus is in the back, and boom! The seismos comes. Which means that they weren't prepared for it. Like so much in life. You realize the things that we fear, I don't think we're ever prepared for them. They take us by surprise, right? If we saw them coming, we would prepare. If we saw them coming, we would do something to try to manage. But rather, the things that we fear tend to just race up suddenly. We don't have control over them, and fear grips our heart. Which is the disciples' story here. The storm comes suddenly. The water laps over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. Mark gives us 2 different details. Mark recalls the story, and he tells us that Jesus was in the stern of the boat, and that he had a pillow. Okay? The pillow image to me always brings up my fluffy white pillow. It just does. So when I see that word, I'm picturing Jesus on his nice white fluffy pillow. But the reality is, it's probably some like heavy bag of sand that they'd use to stabilize the boat. Or maybe it was some of the roping that Jesus put his head on. But he planned to take a nap. I don't think Jesus just randomly fell asleep. I think he found that spot. He intentionally decided he needed some rest. The storm comes. Everyone is out of their minds except for Jesus. In verse 25, the disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. which I think can condense to these three words, which you've probably prayed in your life. Lord, save. I'm dying. Lord, save dying. It's the prayer that when fear races in and the airplane has turbulence and you're gripping the handle, you pray those three things, right? Lord, save dying. It's the very thing when you get that awful report back from the doctor about your child and you don't know what to do, your heart breaks, your tears erupt, and you just pray out, Lord, save dying. I think all of us have been in those moments where all we can muster are those words. Jesus, save me. I need help. Jesus, save dying. It's that visceral prayer that so many of us pray. And the disciples pray it. Lord, save me. I'm dying. Max Lucado says this: don't Christ followers enjoy a calendar full of Caribbean cruises? No. This story sends the not so subtle and not too popular reminder. Getting on board with Christ can mean getting soaked with Christ. Disciples can expect rough seas and stout winds. The difference for you and I is not what we face. We bury children. We battle addictions. We read the news. We're concerned about abuse. We face tomorrow not knowing where a meal might come from. We go to work not knowing if our job is secure. The difference for the follower of Jesus is not in the storms, the tribulations, the things that strike fear in our heart. They're the same as those around us. We're not inoculated from that. The difference for the follower of Jesus is who we find in the boat with us. Who we find in the boat. Jesus gets up. In verse 26, he replies, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" How would you answer that if you're Matthew? Okay, right? So we're in the scene. I'm gripping onto a rope. Peter's yelling at me to do something, and I don't even know what the word is that he wants me to do. The other two fishermen are in the front. They're yelling, but I can't hear them. I'm holding on to this thing for dear life. Jesus just wakes up from the stern, and he asks me this question. Why are you so afraid? How would you answer that? Right? Look around, Jesus. This is a mess. This is a mess and I can't control it. I didn't see this coming. This is taking my life. This is ruining my future. God, why am I so afraid? Because I should be. Because I should be so afraid. And yet Jesus leads in that question with this one little indicator. You have little faith. You of faith that can move a mountain, just as small as a mustard seed. You don't need a ton of faith here, guys. A little bit sometimes will do. Oh, you have little faith. Why are you so afraid? Then he got up, rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked in a much different kind of fear, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. Do you have the slide, guys, that has the rolling verses? I just want you, the one before it, does it have any animation? If it doesn't, it's all right. I grabbed just a couple of the verses I found where Jesus is speaking about not being afraid. Yeah. That's all right, babe. It's good. I'd put throw yourself back, however many years you need to throw yourself back. You're living with your mom, your mom and your dad. What were they known for saying? Were there any catchphrases that came out a lot from your mom, your dad? Wait till your father comes home. So that's one a lot of us, as soon as you said that, my body froze. Another one might be, we just saw a picture Sienna drew this morning, Ethan was showing me. You need to pick up your room. I don't know why Sienna drew that picture this morning, but she did with the little thing on it. It's another phrase, pick up your room, make sure you're home on time. All right, be safe. There's all sorts of phrases that indicate what was important to our parents. I wonder if the disciples ever had the moment reflecting back on, what did Jesus say? What did he say? And if they ever had that moment, I can't help but think they had the conversation, I didn't see it at the time, but man, did Jesus want us to find courage? Man, it didn't matter what the situation was. Jesus was always telling us we didn't need to be afraid. More than anything else, Jesus seemed to have this heart for us, that he wanted us to explore his kingdom life without being gripped by fear. Wow, yeah. Jesus mentioned that all the time, didn't he? Because Jesus knows something that the disciples aren't quite aware of yet. It doesn't matter what the fear is. It doesn't matter what the circumstance is. It doesn't matter if it's water splashing over the boat. It doesn't matter if it's a waiting room in a hospital. It doesn't matter if you're driving on a road, and it doesn't matter if it's in your workplace or in your family or happened 2 years ago or something that might happen tomorrow. Jesus knows something that the disciples weren't aware of yet. There is nothing in which you will not find the presence of the Master. There is no place and there is no darkness and there is no fear anywhere that you are not able to find Jesus' presence with you to calm the storm that's raging. Jesus handles this storm with just his words. And he asks, what kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. So if we're honest this morning, don't we have a lingering question though? If you're honest with yourself, we could end the sermon right here. But let me throw out a question that probably many of you have, that I have. Jesus calmed the storm for these guys. Will he take care of the situation for me? Because boy, have I prayed. Boy, have I begged. I have pleaded with the Lord to do something, and nothing seems to have been done. And I think at this moment, we get to the real place where that's a great story, and yes, I believe Jesus can calm the storm, and I believe Jesus can take away the circumstance, and I believe Jesus could provide the healing and secure the job, and I believe all of that. But my fear is not whether or not he can. My fear in my heart is whether or not he will. I want to offer you this truth. I don't know if Jesus will take away the circumstance that's causing fear. I pray with you that He does. I'm one of the men on the boat pleading with God to do something. And whether it's you walking with me in my life or me walking with you, I will earnestly pray and cry and plead, Lord, save dying, in the hopes that Jesus will do something about the circumstance. But here's maybe a deeper truth to take home. There will be days and there will be times for you to be afraid. And here's our takeaway from Psalm 56:3. It's not if, it's not perhaps I will be, but in those times when I am afraid, when those waves are coming, when God I'm praying and I'm not seeing, when I am afraid on Monday or Tuesday or Sunday, when I am afraid, here's our great truth. Jesus will never leave us even in the midst of the storm. When I am afraid, God, I'm going to trust in you. I'm going to trust in your hands. Why? Because have you seen the birds this summer? They're beautiful. They're beautiful, and they're fed by their Heavenly Father. And when you see the birds fluttering around you, Jesus says, oh, aren't you worth so much more than them? If I feed them, guys, I am going to take care of you. Or have you seen the lupins that have come and gone? They're my beautiful flower, or the lilies of the field. I'm sure those are gorgeous too. Jesus says, you don't need to fear. You don't need to worry about the clothing, the needs in life. Take a look at the lupins. They don't do anything to get clothed, and yet your Heavenly Father clothes them with beauty. Brothers and sisters, your Father's heart for you cannot be compared to His heart for the flowers. And Jesus takes those illustrations and brings them up and says, so do not worry about tomorrow. And it doesn't matter what the circumstance is. Even if I'm afraid, God, when I am afraid, I'll trust in you. Because you love me. And you are for me. This week, when fear tries to take residence in your heart, how can we please the Lord? Can I just offer you the simplest of truths? When you are afraid, trust in Him. Whether it's in a bathroom away with my wife, away from my kids, when I am afraid, God, I'll trust in you. Whether it's that conversation with the doctor, whether it's the unknown at work, God, when I am afraid, teach me to trust in you. Teach me to trust in you. And all of us one day will have a moment. None of us will live forever if the Lord tarries. There will be a day we face our last breath. We face our last day, whenever that may come. Oh God, teach us when we are afraid to trust in you, for you've gone before us to prepare a place for us. This week, we said our final goodbyes to Gloria Bodge. I cannot think of a woman who faced her fears while trusting God more than Gloria Bodge. Gloria Bodge, seriously, half of us know her and half of us don't. And if you didn't know Gloria, I don't blame you. Gloria kept in the background intentionally. She would sit right back where Krista and Jackie are. Gloria would come with Jerry, and after Jerry passed away, Linda and Bud cared for her and brought her in. And that woman faced really, really difficult circumstances. all the way through life. And if you're curious, Linda can fill you in on what some of those challenges were. It was a hard life Gloria had. It was a hard life. And yet if you knew her, how did she always greet you? With the most magnetic smile you've ever met. And it wasn't false. Because her heart declared that same truth. Hey, when I'm afraid, I'll trust in God. It's a pleasure to see you this morning. You walked away from Gloria Bodge thinking you'd go to bless her. And you walk away like, oh, thank you, God, for blessing me through Gloria. Each of us are going to have a testimony. Each of us will have a story left behind us. I pray my story as your pastor and your story as brothers and sisters is Psalm 56. That you would share the story. Man, when I was afraid, I learned to trust God. I didn't know how God was going to come through. I didn't know how He was going to love me. I didn't know what He was going to do. I prayed my heart out. But in the middle of that prayer, man, when I was afraid, I'm trusting God. May that be our story too as we face our fears in a scary, scary world with a God who's over it all. Let me pray and invite our worship team back up. God, I wonder what you see when you see us. Even this morning as we gather as your family at FCCB, Lord, you know our names, you know our stories. You've written them before the foundation of the earth. You are intimately involved with us. And so when you see us facing a storm, when you see us freaking out, when you see panic and fear get the better of us, God, I wonder what you see. Lord, in those times, may you give us the courage to faithfully walk behind you, trusting in our good daddy when things get really dark, trusting in our good Abba when things get really scary. God, you've proved yourself worth it. You've proved yourself faithful through all these years. God, may you not let fear lie to us and begin to distrust you. But in all our days, in all our circumstances, God, when we are afraid, help us to trust you. For you are the eternal King, immortal, invisible, the only wise God. To you belongs glory and power forever and ever. May you reign in our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen.